All right, people, let's go over the Catholic Church in medieval Europe. First of all, set up your notes. Here's what we're looking at for today. On your vocabulary, we're going to look at clergy, pope, religious order, monasteries, schism, and Thomas Aquinas. So you can expect to get those definitions from this slideshow, this presentation today. There's going to be some questions throughout when we go over this in class. Answer those questions here in your notebooks because you'll need to know those later for the assessment later on this week. If you're doing it on the Ed Puzzle, do it on the Ed Puzzle, and you're going to answer those questions anyway. Your objective is you will be introduced to the structure of the Catholic Church and how it influenced decisions made in government during feudal Europe. That's kind of our whole week objective of this. So, all right, let's get into the content. We talked about Christianity. It was started in the Roman Empire by Jesus Christ, and people who are Christian follow the teachings of Jesus Christ. He wasn't super popular in the Roman Empire. He actually was put to death during the Roman Empire. They saw him as a threat to their government. More people started following him, and instead of the government, and they saw him as a threat, so they put him to death. They crucified him. I want to bring up Diocletian really quickly. He was an emperor, a Roman emperor. If you also remember, Rome was split into two, an eastern portion of Rome and the western portion of Rome. So you're going to need to know that here in a second, because when I go over something else, you're going to see why I'm telling you this. So remember, Diocletian, he split up the Roman Empire between the west and the east. Later on, we have an emperor named Constantine, and we're talking about him because he actually made Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire. So even though the Roman Empire originally crucified Jesus, Constantine said, hey, no, this is a good religion. We're going to make it the religion of the Roman Empire. Then later on, there was something called a schism in the Catholic Church, in this Christian church. And a schism is when two things break apart. You know, there's the line there that makes it look like that the water or the ice there is breaking apart. That's what schism means. That's one of your vocabulary words. And what it really had to do was between the Eastern and Western Roman Empire. People in the West believe in the Roman Catholic Church because it was based in Rome. It still is. The Roman Catholic Church is actually still based in Rome at the Vatican. And then in the East, they started something called the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's really similar to the Roman Catholic Church. There are some differences in who is the leader. In the West, the Roman Catholic leader is the Pope. And in the East, the Eastern Orthodox leader was the Emperor. So there's a little difference between the churches there. There's also some difference between some worship practices between the two. But that's all you really need to know for this is there's a split between the two. The more Catholic in the world today, more popular in the world today is the Roman Catholic Church. And that's what we're going to talk about because that was what was more popular in medieval Europe as well. So the power of the church, the medieval Catholic Church became really, 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 really powerful. They had the word of God on their side. And then church officials also had ties to nobility, which means they had ties to kings. They had ties to lords, things like that. And often church officials and members of royal families were one and the same. So they had the power of the church and they had the power of having land and money and all those types of things. The church became really wealthy because of the land that it owned, which was most of Europe. The church owned, we're going to learn actually on more about this even on our next lesson, that they owned like 2/3 of the land in Europe. And then soon, and we're going to find out why this is a problem, soon the church had more money than even the kings. The structure of the Catholic Church, as I'm going over this, see if this seems familiar. At the top, we got the Pope, and then underneath we have cardinals. So there's one Pope at the top. One Pope at the top of the Catholic Church. Still is today. Still is one Pope in charge of the Catholic Church. Then we have cardinals. There's several cardinals throughout the world. Then we have archbishops down to bishops and then down to priests. So we have this kind of pyramid type thing. Think about that as if it compares to anything else we've talked about. So the Pope is in charge. The cardinals are second and oversee different areas. The Pope is chosen if the Pope either decides not to be Pope, dies, or something like that. The next Pope is chosen from these cardinals. Then we have archbishops, and then just bishops, and then finally local priests. Does that sound familiar? Think about that question. It should sound fairly familiar to you. We studied something in Europe. It starts with an F that has the same basic structure. Now let's talk about religious orders. Within the Catholic Church, there are different religious orders. A religious order is like a smaller section of the church that focuses on a certain thing or a certain way of life or a certain practice. A religious order is sort of a spin-off that we put here of the Catholic Church. For instance, like a monk. A monk lives in a monastery. That is a vocabulary word. So a monk lives in a monastery. If you click on any of these, you can get some more information about these. But in a monastery, you might be required to do certain specific duties. We actually saw monasteries when we looked at Zen Buddhism as well. And we saw some videos about some of the duties that they had to perform. But they might perform things like copying the Bible. That was the only way you could get the Bible out, was to write down copies. Cleaning, meditating, chanting, cooking, learning from other church leaders, and spreading the gospel or the word of God. Usually in a monastery, it was, well, not usually, it was all males. Lots of times they took vows of poverty, sometimes vows of silence. They were very regimented and worked really hard. And it may not seem like that fun of a place to be, but if you join a monastery, you got to learn to read, you got to learn to write, you got food, you got to learn from other people. So it was really kind of a good place to be if you had nothing else to do. If you didn't want to be, remember, there were serfs during this time. If you didn't want to be a serf and tied to a manor, you could try to join a monastery, and that would take you away. Nuns are women who actually had a religious order, and they lived in convents. Other religious orders are people like friars. They lived as beggars and traveled from town to town. Friar Tuck, if you remember, Robin Hood Friar Tuck is a fictional friar, but they often just wandered from place to place talking about the gospel, the word of God, and teaching people and things like that. There's the Franciscan Order, and that was started by Francis de Assisi. He later earned sainthood, and his followers would give up their possessions and serve as teachers. So you can look back at the other slide and list some reasons why people would live in a medieval monastery. There's several reasons. One, they might want to be educated. Two, they might not want to be part of the feudal system, and they might want to live, they might not want to be a serf anymore or whatever lower rank that they are. Europe was pretty chaotic as well. So if you weren't part of a manor, there wasn't really any place for you to go. This was a little bit before the time that we're talking about now is a little bit before the medieval towns we talked about before. And then again, some of the duties would be copying the Bible. That was a big one. Cleaning, working, keeping the monastery up, all those types of things. Out of some of these monasteries and these religious teachings, we have rises of universities, and that meant these people are coming together and learning. There's a lot of people in Europe during this time that couldn't read or write. After the Roman Empire, there's a little bit of a decline in education, but there were a lot of people that couldn't read or write. So the church was a place, again, where you could learn to read or write or do these things, and then they would get together and teach. They made these illuminated manuscripts that are really, you've probably seen before, where it's really fancy calligraphy writing with pictures and things and different colors and gold leaf and things like that in the manuscripts. Bishops set up schools and taught sons of wealthy nobles and other church members. And then also, thanks to the Muslim scholars who preserved Greek writing, students were taught Latin and Greek philosophies. And again, you can see a little bit more here. Finally, Thomas Aquinas was a scholar that came out of this. And one of the big deals, and may not seem like a big deal today, but one of the big deals that Thomas Aquinas professed was that you could have logic and faith. not everything happened because of the Bible, and not everything happened necessarily because of the Word of God. Something could logically happen on its own. So he started saying, yeah, we can still study the Bible and still worship God, still be good Christians, but also use a little bit of science and know that there is some logic that's also based in what's happening. That's it for this lesson on the medieval Catholic Church. Go back through the slideshow, watch the videos, define the words, and we'll see you in the next one.